The classroom fell silent when Kira mentioned the war. 23 pairs of eyes stared at her, some confused, others skeptical. Her new teacher, Mrs. Henderson, smiled that patient smile adults use when they think a child is seeking attention. "I'm sure that must have been very scary," Mrs. Henderson said gently, clearly not believing a word. "But you're safe here now on Nova Station." Kira's jaw tightened. She wanted to scream that it wasn't some made-up story, that the Battle of Epsilon Ridge had actually happened, that she'd watched her colony burn from the escape pod window. But she'd learned in her first week at this fancy orbital school that nobody wanted to hear the truth. They wanted the sanitized version, the one that fit their comfortable lives. The other students had grown up on Nova Station, the crown jewel of human expansion in the outer reaches. Their parents were diplomats, corporate executives, and military officers stationed at the safest post in the sector. They'd never heard a plasma cannon charge up or smelled the acrid smoke of burning hab domes. To them, the war with the Zakran Empire was something that happened in news feeds, distant and unreal. At lunch, Kira sat alone in the corner of the cafeteria, the same spot she'd claimed since arriving 3 weeks ago. She picked at her synthesized protein meal, which tasted like cardboard compared to the real vegetables her father used to grow in the colony's hydroponics bay. Her father. The thought made her throat tighten. "Hey, war girl," a voice called out. Marcus Trent stood over her table, flanked by his usual crew of followers. He was tall for 13, with the kind of confident smirk that came from never facing real consequences. "Tell us another story about how you fought off the aliens with your bare hands." Kira hadn't said anything like that. She'd simply told the truth during her introduction. She was the sole survivor from Colony 447, extracted during a Zakran raid. Somehow, that truth had been twisted in the retelling until kids thought she was claiming to be some kind of action hero. "I never said I fought anyone," Kira replied quietly, not looking up from her meal. "Right. You just magically survived when everyone else died?" "Sure." Marcus laughed and his friends joined in. "My dad's an admiral. He says Colony 447 was evacuated in an orderly fashion. No one died. You're just making stuff up for attention." Kira's fork bent in her grip. She forced herself to breathe, to stay calm. Getting angry would only make things worse. The station counselor had told her that people often rejected traumatic truths because accepting them was too uncomfortable. It was easier to call her a liar than to believe that human colonies were actually falling to the Zakran advance. "Whatever you need to believe," Kira muttered. Marcus leaned closer, his voice dropping to a mock whisper. "My dad also says that if your colony really was attacked, it was probably your fault. Maybe someone there helped the Zakran. Maybe that someone was related to you." Kira's head snapped up, her gray eyes blazing. "Take that back. Or what? You gonna call your family?" Marcus grinned cruelly. "Oh wait, you can't, because according to your story, they're all dead." The cafeteria had gone quiet. Everyone was watching now, waiting to see what the weird new girl would do. Kira's hands shook with rage and grief. She wanted to launch herself across the table, to make Marcus hurt the way she hurt every single day. But violence would get her expelled, and then where would she go? She had no family, no home, nothing except this spot on Nova Station that the refugee relocation program had assigned her. "You don't know anything," Kira said, her voice barely above a whisper. She grabbed her tray and walked away, ignoring the laughter that followed her. In the bathroom, she locked herself in a stall and pressed her palms against her eyes, refusing to cry. Crying was weakness, and she'd been weak enough when she'd hidden in the cargo hold while the Zakran soldiers searched the colony. She'd been weak when she'd left her little brother behind because she couldn't carry him and run fast enough. She wouldn't be weak now. The rest of the day passed in a blur. In history class, they studied the early days of human expansion, back when everyone thought the galaxy was empty and waiting for them. No mention of what happened when humanity met species that didn't want to share. In physics, they calculated orbital mechanics, equations that had probably saved Kira's life when she'd managed to input the correct trajectory for the escape pod. After school, Kira took the long way back to her assigned quarters in the station's residential ring. Nova Station was massive, a rotating cylinder 10 kilometers long with artificial gravity and its own internal weather system. The wealthy lived in the outer rings where gravity was strongest. Refugees like Kira got compact rooms in the 0G core, accessible only by climbing through access tubes. Her room was barely 3 meters square, with a sleeping bag velcroed to the wall, a small storage locker, and a porthole looking out into space. It was nothing like the family quarters she'd shared with her parents and brother, but it was hers. She floated in the center, letting the weightlessness calm her. A message light blinked on her wall console. Kira pulled herself over and checked it. Another appointment with the station counselor, Dr. Yamani. The message included a gentle reminder that attending therapy was mandatory for all displaced persons under 18. Kira deleted it. Dr. Yamani meant well, but she asked questions that Kira couldn't answer without breaking down. Questions like, how do you feel about your loss? Or do you have any coping strategies? How was she supposed to cope with the fact that her entire world had been destroyed, that she'd survived through pure luck while better people died? She pulled a small metal tin from her locker, one of the few possessions she'd managed to grab before fleeing Colony 447. Inside was a photo chip, a lock of brown hair that belonged to her brother, and a coded data stick that she didn't fully understand. Her father had pressed it into her hands in those final moments, making her promise to keep it safe. If anything happens, he'd said, this is important. More important than us. At the time, she'd thought he was being dramatic. Now she knew better. The data stick was encrypted with military-grade security, something far beyond what a simple colony farmer should have. Whatever was on it, her father had considered it worth dying for. Kira closed the tin and tucked it back into the locker. Maybe someday she'd figure out how to access the data. But not today. Today, she just needed to survive being called a liar by kids who'd never seen war. Through her porthole, she could see the distant stars. Somewhere out there, beyond the comfortable safety of Nova Station, the Zakran Empire was still advancing. More colonies were falling. More families were being torn apart. And here, in the heart of human civilization, people convinced themselves it wasn't really happening. But Kira knew the truth. The war was real. The Zakran were coming. And eventually, even Nova Station's walls wouldn't be thick enough to keep out reality. The nightmares came every time Kira closed her eyes. Tonight was no different. She was back in the colony's underground shelter, her brother Theo clutching her hand as explosions shook the walls. Dust rained from the ceiling. Someone was screaming. Then the lights went out, and in the darkness she heard the chittering sounds that haunted her waking hours. The Zakran didn't speak human languages. They clicked and whistled, a sound like insects magnified 1,000 times. Kira woke gasping, her sleeping bag drifting away from the wall in the zero gravity. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cool air circulation. The chronometer on her wall read 0340 hours. 3 hours until she had to be at school. She couldn't go back to sleep. Instead, she pulled herself to the porthole and stared out at the stars. Her reflection stared back, a thin girl with tangled black hair and shadows under her eyes that never seemed to fade. She looked older than 13. War did that to people. A flash of movement caught her eye. Outside, beyond the station's superstructure, a small transport ship was docking at one of the military piers. Even in the dark of space, she recognized the angular design. It was a courier vessel, the type used for classified communications. 3 more had docked in the past week. Something was happening, something the civilian population wasn't being told about. Kira had learned to notice things like this. On Colony 447, her father had taught her to read patterns to see what others missed. Survival isn't about strength, he'd told her once while they worked in the hydroponics bay. It's about paying attention. She dressed in her school uniform, a gray jumpsuit with Nova Station's emblem on the shoulder. The emblem showed a star surrounded by protective hands, symbolizing humanity's safe haven. The irony wasn't lost on her. Safe havens didn't need a military garrison or encrypted courier ships arriving in the middle of the night. The station was quiet at this early hour. Kira climbed through the access tubes toward the outer rings where gravity gradually increased. She liked moving through the empty corridors before dawn, when she didn't have to see the pity or disbelief in people's eyes. But she wasn't alone today. As she pulled herself around a corner, she nearly collided with another person. A boy about her age, maybe 14, with dark skin and startlingly green eyes. He wore a maintenance uniform which seemed odd given his age. Sorry, Kira mumbled, trying to move past. You're the girl from Colony 447, the boy said. It wasn't a question. Kira tensed, waiting for the usual mockery or invasive questions. But the boy's expression was neutral, almost curious. So what if I am? I'm Jamal. My mom's in station security. He floated beside her, matching her pace through the tube. She doesn't talk about her work much, but I overheard her on a secure call last night. She was verifying your story, running checks on the colony records. Kira's stomach tightened. And everything you said checks out. Every detail. The attack timeline, the casualty numbers, all of it. Jamal looked at her with something she hadn't seen in weeks. Belief. She told her supervisor that you're probably the most reliable witness they have to Zakran assault tactics. But her supervisor said to bury the report because it would cause unnecessary panic. So they know I'm telling the truth, but they want everyone to think I'm a liar? Kira felt a bitter laugh escape her throat. That's perfect. It's worse than that. Jamal glanced around even though they were alone in the access tube. My mom's scared. Really scared. She said the Zakran are moving faster than anyone predicted. More colonies have gone dark in the past month, but the news feeds aren't reporting it. They're trying to prevent mass panic. Kira thought about the courier ships. How close are they? The Zakran, I mean. I don't know exact numbers, but close enough that Nova Station is preparing contingencies. Jamal pulled a small data pad from his pocket. Look, I know this is weird, me approaching you like this, but I needed to tell someone who'd understand. My mom's worked security for 15 years, and I've never seen her afraid before. Not like this. They reached the transition point where the access tube connected to the residential ring. Gravity began pulling at them, a gentle tug that increased with each meter. Kira's muscles, weakened by weeks in zero-G living, protested. Why tell me? Kira asked. I'm nobody. A refugee kid that everyone thinks is crazy. Because you survived, Jamal said simply. You got out of an active war zone alone. That takes skills most people don't have. And because I think you have something the military wants. Kira's hand unconsciously moved to her chest, where the metal tin was hidden under her uniform. Her father's data stick. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. Jamal's green eyes were sharp. My mom mentioned that someone from Colonial Intelligence has been asking questions about survivors from 447. Specifically, they're looking for any data cores or computer equipment that might have been salvaged. Your colony wasn't just a farming outpost, was it? Kira's mind raced. She'd always known her father's work involved more than growing vegetables, but he'd never explained exactly what else he did. The encrypted data stick suddenly felt like it was burning through her clothes. I need to get to class, she said, pulling away from Jamal. Wait. He grabbed her arm gently. If you have something they want, you need to be careful. Colonial Intelligence isn't like regular military. They operate outside normal chains of command. If they think you have valuable intel about the Zakran or the colonies, they won't ask nicely. Then what am I supposed to do? I don't know yet, but maybe we can figure it out together. Jamal released her arm. I'm good with computers and security systems. My mom taught me before she realized I'd use it to hack her files. He gave a small smile. If you need help, find me in the engineering section after school. Bay 7C. Before Kira could respond, Jamal launched himself back up the access tube, disappearing into the zero-G core with practiced ease. She stood there in the increasing gravity, her thoughts spinning faster than the station itself. School was as miserable as usual. In xenobiology class, they studied the known alien species that humanity had encountered. The peaceful Thulani traders, the isolationist Korath, the mysterious singers who communicated through radio waves. The Zakran Empire wasn't mentioned, as if ignoring them would make them disappear. Marcus Trent sat 2 rows behind Kira, and she could feel his eyes on her throughout the lesson. During the break, he made sure to bump into her hard enough to knock her data pad to the floor. Oops, he said, not sounding sorry at all. Guess war heroes aren't very coordinated. Kira picked up her pad without responding. Engaging with him only made things worse. But as she returned to her seat, she noticed something odd. Marcus's datapad was open on his desk, displaying a message thread. From what she could see, he was talking to someone about her. The words refugee girl and security risk jumped out before he noticed her looking and quickly closed the screen. A cold feeling settled in her stomach. Was Marcus just a bully, or was something else going on? His father was an admiral. That meant access, connections, the kind of resources that could make a friendless refugee disappear without many questions. After class, instead of heading to the cafeteria, Kira made her way toward the engineering section. She needed answers, and Jamal seemed like the only person on this entire station who might actually help her. The corridors in this part of Nova Station were industrial, lit by harsh utility lights. Workers in maintenance uniforms moved with purpose, carrying tools and equipment. Nobody paid attention to one skinny girl in a school uniform. Bay 7C was tucked behind a water reclamation facility. Kira found Jamal inside, surrounded by dismantled computer components. He looked up when she entered, unsurprised. "That was fast," he said. "I figured you'd take at least a few days to decide to trust me." "I don't trust you," Kira replied honestly. "But you're the only person who's treated me like I'm not insane. So I'm taking a chance." "Fair enough." Jamal gestured to the computer parts. "I've been thinking about your situation. If colonial intelligence is after data from your colony, and if you happen to have that data, you need leverage. Something that makes you more valuable protected than disappeared. You think they'd kill me?" The words came out steadier than Kira felt. "I think they'd do whatever they consider necessary. These are people making decisions about entire colonies." Jamal's expression was grave. "But if you can prove that what you have is important enough, they might decide you're worth keeping safe. The trick is figuring out what's on your data stick without alerting anyone who might want to take it." Kira pulled out the metal tin and removed the data stick, holding it up to the light. It looked ordinary, just a small rectangular piece of plastic and circuitry, but her father had died to protect it. "Can you break the encryption?" she asked. "Maybe. Probably not quickly." Jamal took the stick, carefully examining it. "This is serious security. Military grade at minimum, possibly intelligence level. Your dad wasn't messing around." "He was just a farmer," Kira said. But even as the words left her mouth, she knew they weren't entirely true. Farmers don't have access to encryption like this. Jamal connected the stick to his terminal, and lines of code began scrolling across the screen. "Whatever's on here, someone powerful wanted it protected. The question is, from whom? The Zakran or other humans?" Jamal worked on the encryption for 3 days. Kira visited Bay 7C every afternoon, watching lines of code cascade across his screens while pretending to do homework. The engineering bay became her sanctuary, a place where nobody questioned her story or looked at her with pity. On the 4th day, Jamal finally broke through the first layer of security. What they found made both of them go silent. The data stick didn't contain farming records or family photos. Instead, it held detailed intelligence reports on Zakran military movements, colony defense assessments, and classified communications between Colonial Command and the outer settlements. "Your father was a spy," Jamal said quietly, his fingers frozen over the keyboard. "Or an intelligence officer. This data is marked Level 7 classified. That's higher than what most admirals can access." Kira felt her world shift again. Her father, who'd taught her to grow tomatoes and sang Old Earth songs while cooking dinner, had been living a double life. She thought about all the nights he'd stayed late in his office, the encrypted comm calls he'd taken in private, the way he'd sometimes look at the sky with an expression she couldn't read. "He never told me," she whispered. "He was protecting you. If the Zakran had known, they would have targeted your whole family specifically." Jamal scrolled through more files. "Look at this. These are colony defense assessments from the month before your attack. Your dad was reporting that 447's defenses were inadequate, that an assault could overwhelm the garrison in under 20 minutes. He requested evacuation or reinforcements. Did he get either? No. Colonial Command marked his request as reviewed and filed, which is bureaucrat speak for ignored." Jamal's voice was bitter. "They left your colony hanging out there knowing it was vulnerable." Kira's hands clenched into fists. Her father had known the attack was coming. He'd tried to warn people, tried to save them. And the people in charge had done nothing. All those deaths, including her family's, could have been prevented. "There's more," Jamal continued, opening another file. "These are tactical observations from the attack itself. Your father was recording data during the assault, right up until moments before his death. Ship classifications, weapon yields, assault patterns. This is incredibly valuable intelligence." "Then why hide it on an encrypted stick and give it to me?" Kira asked. "Why not send it straight to command?" "Because he didn't trust them. Look at the file names." Jamal pointed to a document labeled Operation Lighthouse. "Your father wasn't just reporting to Colonial Command. He was part of some kind of independent intelligence network. And based on these communications, that network suspected there was a leak somewhere high up in the command structure." The implications hit Kira like a physical blow. "You're saying someone in our own government might be helping the Zakran? Or at least not trying very hard to stop them?" "I don't know." But your father definitely thought something was wrong with how the war was being handled. Jamal closed the files and removed the data stick, handing it back to Kira. You need to be very careful who you show this to. The wrong person finding out what you have could get you killed. Kira tucked the stick back into her tin. Her father's final gift wasn't just data. It was a burden, a responsibility she didn't know how to carry. At 13 years old, she was suddenly holding intelligence that could potentially change the course of the war. What do I do? She asked. We need time to think. Jamal started packing up his equipment. Don't mention this to anyone, not even the counselor or teachers. Trust no one until we figure out who the good guys actually are. That night, Kira couldn't sleep at all. She floated in her small quarters, turning the metal tin over and over in her hands. Through the porthole, another military courier ship docked. The 5th one this week. Whatever was happening, it was escalating. The next morning at school, everything changed. Kira arrived to find Marcus Trent surrounded by security officers in the main corridor. He was arguing with them, his usual confidence cracking into something closer to fear. When he saw Kira, his eyes widened with recognition and something else. Guilt maybe, or panic, that's her. Marcus pointed at Kira. She's the one you should be investigating, not me. Mrs. Henderson appeared and gently guided Kira away from the commotion. Don't worry about that, dear. Marcus is having some trouble with school regulations. It doesn't concern you. But Kira had seen the datapad one of the security officers was holding. On its screen was a message thread, the same one Marcus had been reading in class. Whatever he'd been planning regarding her had apparently crossed a line serious enough to get station security involved. Later that day, Jamal found her at lunch. He slid into the seat across from her, his expression urgent but controlled. We have a problem. My mom came home last night and told me that Colonial Intelligence is sending someone to the station, an operative named Commander Sato. She's coming specifically to interview survivors from the frontier colonies. So they're looking for me, not just you. But yes, you're on the list. Jamal leaned forward. The thing is, my mom seemed worried about it. She said Commander Sato has a reputation for getting results, but her methods are questionable. People who talk to her tend to have their stories change, or they disappear into protective custody that no one can verify. Kira's appetite vanished completely. When does she arrive? 2 days. Maybe 3 if the courier routes are delayed. Jamal glanced around to make sure no one was listening. We need a plan. You can't just hand over that data stick. Once they have it, you lose all leverage. You become just another refugee with a sad story. So what do you suggest? We make copies. Hidden copies in multiple locations. Jamal pulled out his own datapad showing her a schematic of Nova Station's computer network. I can embed encrypted fragments throughout the station's systems. Not enough in any one place to be useful. But altogether, they'd reconstruct the original data. Then we set up a dead man switch. A what? An automated system that releases the data if something happens to you. That way, anyone thinking about making you disappear has to consider the consequences. Jamal's green eyes were intense. It's not perfect protection, but it's something. Kira thought about her options. She was a 13-year-old refugee with no family, no resources, and no official standing. The adults in charge had already proven they'd rather deny the truth than face it. If she didn't take steps to protect herself, who would? Do it, she decided. But make sure the dead man's switch is set up first. I want that insurance in place before Commander Sato arrives. They spent the next 2 days preparing. Jamal was brilliant with computers, his fingers flying across keyboards as he wove Kira's data throughout Nova Station's systems. He hid fragments in maintenance logs, weather control subroutines, and even the cafeteria's meal planning algorithms. No single fragment was large enough to trigger security scans, but together, they formed a complete backup of everything on the data stick. The dead man's switch was more complex. Jamal set it up so that Kira had to enter a code every 12 hours. If she failed to enter the code, if she was arrested or disappeared or worse, the system would automatically compile all the data fragments and broadcast them on every communication channel in the sector. The truth about Colony 447, about her father's intelligence work, about the suspected leak in Colonial Command, all of it would become public. It's not subtle, Jamal admitted as he finalized the setup. But subtlety isn't what we need right now. We need a big enough threat that they'll think twice about touching you. Thank you, Kira said. You didn't have to help me. You're risking yourself by doing this. Jamal shrugged, but she could see the worry in his eyes. My mom always said that the difference between surviving and living is whether you stand up for what's right. Besides, if the Zakrin really are coming for Nova Station, we're all at risk anyway. Might as well try to do something useful with whatever time we have left. His words echoed in Kira's mind later as she floated in her quarters. How much time did any of them have? How long before the comfortable illusion of safety on Nova Station shattered the way it had on Colony 447? The chronometer reached midnight and Kira entered her code into Jamal's dead man's switch. 12 more hours of insurance. 12 more hours of survival. She'd learned to measure her life in these small increments, never looking too far ahead because the future was too uncertain. Through the porthole, she could see the running lights of ships moving through space. One of them might be carrying Commander Sato. In less than 2 days, Kira would have to face someone who had the power to either help her or destroy her. Everything depended on how she played the upcoming confrontation. Her father had been a spy, skilled in deception and strategy. Kira wondered if any of those skills had passed to her through genetics or training she didn't remember receiving. She'd survived the destruction of her colony through luck and quick thinking. Now she'd need something more. She'd need to become someone her father would be proud of, someone who could fight back against the forces that had torn her world apart. Sleep finally came as the station's artificial night cycle deepened, but even in her dreams, Kira was preparing for the battle ahead. Not a battle with plasma cannons and starships, but something potentially more dangerous. A battle of words and wills against people who, though. Commander Sato arrived ahead of schedule. Kira was in xenobiology class when the announcement came through the school's communication system. All students from frontier colonies were to report to the administration office immediately. That meant exactly one person in this classroom. Every eye turned to Kira. For once, Marcus Trent wasn't smirking. He'd been subdued since his encounter with security, avoiding her in the hallways. Whatever message thread had gotten him in trouble, it had clearly taught him something about consequences. Mrs. Henderson gave Kira an encouraging nod. Go ahead, dear. I'm sure it's just routine documentation. Kira gathered her things slowly, using the time to steady her nerves. This was it, the moment she'd been preparing for. She touched the metal tin hidden under her uniform, feeling the outline of the data stick inside. Her insurance policy was in place. Jamal had confirmed it this morning with a simple thumbs up across the cafeteria. The walk to the administration office felt longer than it actually was. Kira's mind raced through possible scenarios. What would Commander Sato ask? What should she reveal? Where was the line between cooperation and giving away too much? The administration office had been cleared of the usual staff. Only one person remained. A woman in a dark colonial intelligence uniform standing with her hands clasped behind her back. Commander Sato was younger than Kira expected, maybe 30, with sharp features and eyes that seemed to catalog everything in a single glance. Kira Reeves, sole survivor of Colony 447. Sato's voice was neither warm nor cold, just precisely neutral. I'm Commander Sato from Colonial Intelligence. I'd like to ask you some questions about your experiences. Am I in trouble? Kira asked, playing the part of a nervous kid. It wasn't entirely an act. Not at all. We're simply gathering information from anyone who's had direct contact with Zakrin forces. Your testimony could help us better prepare our defenses. Sato gestured to a chair. Please sit. The office had been arranged like an interrogation room, Kira realized. One chair for her facing another chair where Sato would sit. No desk between them, nothing to hide behind. A camera in the corner recorded everything. This wasn't going to be a friendly chat. Kira sat down, keeping her posture small and unthreatening. Let Sato think she was just a scared kid. That would give her room to maneuver. Let's start with the basics, Sato said, settling into her chair. Tell me about the day of the attack. Kira recited the story she'd told before. The alarms, the chaos, the underground shelter. She'd gone over these details so many times that they came out smoothly, almost mechanically. But this time she paid attention to Sato's reactions. The commander's face revealed nothing, but her eyes moved constantly, tracking Kira's body language, looking for tells. You mentioned that you made it to an escape pod, Sato said. How did a 12-year-old girl navigate a colony under attack and successfully launch a pod on her own? Here was the trap. If Kira claimed it was pure luck, Sato wouldn't believe her. But if she seemed too competent, questions would arise about who had trained her. She needed a middle path. My father taught me, Kira said truthfully. He was paranoid about safety, made me memorize emergency routes, Showed me how the pods worked. I thought he was being overprotective. Her voice caught slightly. Genuine emotion bleeding through. Turns out he was right to be worried. Your father, David Reeves. He was listed as an agricultural specialist. Sato pulled out a data pad, scrolling through information. 15 years on Colony 447. Before that, his records get sparse. A few years on Earth, education at the University of Mars, then gaps where employment isn't clearly documented. Kira's heart rate spiked, but she kept her expression neutral. I don't know much about his life before the colony. He didn't talk about it. Did your father have any unusual visitors? Any communication equipment beyond standard civilian grade? I don't think so. He worked in the hydroponics bay most days. Came home for dinner. Normal stuff. Kira met Sato's eyes directly. Why are you asking about my father? He's dead. The Zakrin killed him. I'm asking because we're trying to understand how someone with his background ended up on a frontier colony. It's not a typical career path. Sato leaned forward slightly. Kira, I need you to understand something. The war with the Zakrin is worse than what's being reported publicly. Many more colonies are at risk. If your father had any information, any data about Zakrin tactics or colony defenses, it could save thousands of lives. There it was, the real reason for this interview. They knew or suspected that her father had been intelligence. They wanted whatever data he'd collected. The question was whether they knew she had it. I don't have anything like that, Kira said carefully. When the attack happened, I just grabbed whatever I could carry and ran. I didn't have time to search for files or equipment. What about a data stick? Small, encrypted, possibly something your father specifically told you to take? Sato's question was too precise. Someone had talked or they'd intercepted communications. Or there was a leak in the intelligence network her father had worked for. Either way, they definitely knew about the data stick. Kira made a decision. Lying completely would only make things worse if they already had evidence, but she could control how much truth she revealed. My father gave me something, she admitted, right before I left. He said to keep it safe, but I don't know what's on it. It's encrypted with codes I don't have. Sato's expression didn't change, but there was a subtle shift in her posture. Interest. Do you still have this data stick? Yes, may I see it? This was the critical moment. Kira reached under her uniform and pulled out the metal tin, opening it slowly. She showed Sato the contents. The photo chip, her brother's lock of hair, and the data stick. But she didn't hand anything over. This is all I have left of my family, Kira said quietly. The only things I managed to save. My father made me promise to keep this safe. I don't even know if the data stick still works after everything that happened. Sato reached for the tin, but Kira pulled it back slightly. The commander's eyes narrowed. Kira, that data stick could contain vital intelligence. I need to examine it. And then what? Kira asked, finding courage she didn't know she had. You take it, I never see it again, and I lose the last thing my father gave me? How do I know you'll keep it safe? How do I know you won't just file it away like they filed away his warnings about the attack? Sato went very still. What warnings? Too late, Kira realized she'd revealed something. But maybe that was okay. Maybe it was time to stop pretending she was just a clueless kid. My father knew the colony was vulnerable. He tried to get help. Nobody listened. And then everyone died. How do you know he tried to get help? Because I'm not stupid, Commander. I know my father wasn't just a farmer. I know he was sending reports to someone. And I know that the people who were supposed to protect us didn't do their job. Kira's voice was stronger now, anger giving her strength. So before I hand over the only thing my father thought was important enough to die for, I want guarantees. Sato studied her for a long moment. When she spoke again, her tone had shifted from interrogator to something almost respectful. What kind of guarantees? I want to know that whatever's on this data stick will actually be used to help people. Not buried because it's inconvenient or embarrassing. I want protection. Real protection, not just being shuffled into another refugee facility where people think I'm crazy. Kira took a breath. And I want answers about why my colony was left. Defenseless when someone knew the Zakrin were coming. Those are substantial demands from someone in your position. My position is that I have something you need, and you can't take it by force because... Kira paused, deciding how much to reveal. Because I'm not the only one who knows what's on it anymore. If anything happens to me, the information goes public. All of it. Sato's eyes widened slightly, the first real emotion she'd shown. You made copies? I made insurance, Kira corrected. You can check the data stick if you want. It's the original. But yeah, I'm not totally helpless. The commander sat back, reassessing. You're smarter than your file suggested. My file probably says I'm a traumatized kid making up stories for attention. Kira met her gaze steadily. But I'm the girl who survived when everyone else died. That ought to count for something. A long silence stretched between them. Kira could hear her own heartbeat loud in her ears. She'd gambled everything on this confrontation, betting that showing strength would work better than playing weak. If she'd miscalculated, if Sato decided to simply arrest her and tear apart the station looking for the copies, then all of Jamal's work would be for nothing. Finally, Sato stood up. I need to make some calls. Don't leave the school. We'll continue this conversation later. Am I under arrest? No. But you're definitely under protection now, whether you want it or not. Someone trying to copy classified intelligence data throughout a station's systems tends to trigger alarms. Sato moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, your father was a good man. One of the best officers I worked with before he went deep cover. He'd be proud of how you handled yourself just now, Shiliu. Kira woke to the sound of alarms, not the gentle morning chime of the school schedule, but harsh klaxons that made her heart jump into her throat. She'd heard these alarms before on Colony 447, right before the Zakrin attack began. She rolled out of bed, already moving toward the door before her conscious mind fully engaged. The military quarters had better emergency protocols than civilian areas. A screen on the wall flashed red with instructions. All personnel to battle stations. Civilian lockdown in effect. The door was sealed. Kira pressed her hand against the control panel, but nothing happened. She was trapped in a comfortable prison cell while something terrible happened outside. Through the window, she could see the running lights of ships, too many ships moving with the kind of coordinated patterns that meant military action. The Zakrin were here. They'd found Nova Station. Kira's mind raced. She'd known they were coming, had tried to warn people, but nobody had listened. Now the war that everyone pretended wasn't happening had arrived at humanity's safest outpost, and she was locked in a room with no way to help or escape. The window suddenly brightened with a flash of light. An explosion, distant but massive. Kira pressed her face against the glass and saw one of the outer defensive platforms erupt in flames. Debris scattered outward in a slowly expanding cloud. More flashes followed as the battle intensified. Someone banged on her door. Kira jumped back as it slid open, revealing Commander Sato in full combat gear. The woman's face was grim, all pretense of calm professionalism gone. We need to move now. What's happening? Kira asked, though she already knew. Zakrin assault force. 3 capital ships and support craft. They hit us without warning, right through our sensor perimeter. Sato grabbed Kira's arm, pulling her into the corridor. We're evacuating essential personnel and high-value assets. You qualify as both. They ran through corridors filled with organized chaos. Military personnel rushed past in both directions, some heading toward battle stations, others shepherding civilians toward evacuation points. The station shuddered as something big hit the outer hull. Emergency bulkheads began sealing, dividing the station into defensive compartments. Where are we going? Kira gasped, struggling to keep up with Sato's longer strides. Hangar Bay 7. We have a courier ship fueled and ready. Sato turned a corner sharply, nearly colliding with a squad of Marines heading the opposite direction. Your data stick just became the most important thing in this sector. If Nova Station falls, we can't let the Zakrin capture that intelligence. Another explosion rocked the station, this one close enough to make the lights flicker. Kira stumbled and Sato caught her. They were passing through the civilian sections now, and the organized military response gave way to pure panic. People screamed, children cried, families huddled together in doorways hoping for protection that might not come. Kira saw Mrs. Henderson trying to calm a group of students. She saw Marcus Trent's father, the Admiral, barking orders into a communication device while his son stood nearby looking terrified. She saw hundreds of faces, all of them learning the same lesson she'd learned on Colony 447. Safety was an illusion, and war didn't care about your comfortable life. Wait, Kira pulled back against Sato's grip. What about the other evacuations? The civilians? Civilian transports are launching from bays 1 through 5. We're securing the essential personnel separately. Sato's expression was hard. I know it's not fair, but we don't have time for fair right now. They reached Hangar Bay 7 through a service corridor. The bay was smaller than the civilian areas, designed for fast military craft. A sleek courier ship sat on the launch pad, its engines already warming up. Crew members were doing last-minute checks, moving with practiced efficiency despite the chaos. But as they stepped onto the hangar floor, something exploded above them. Not outside the station, inside. A section of the hangar ceiling collapsed, raining metal and debris. Sato shoved Kira aside, and they both hit the deck as huge chunks of superstructure crashed down where they'd been standing. The courier ship wasn't so lucky. A support beam punched through its hull like a spear, rupturing fuel lines and starting a chain reaction of small explosions. The crew scattered, abandoning the dying ship. Within seconds, it was clear the vessel would never fly again. "Secondary explosion," someone shouted. The Zakrin hit the ammunition depot 3 levels up. Sato swore viciously, pulling Kira to her feet. "Plan B. We need to reach the civilian transports." They fought their way back through the corridors, but the battle was intensifying. The station's defensive systems were failing one by one. Through windows, Kira could see Zakrin fighter craft darting between Nova Station's defensive platforms, their weapons tearing through human ships like paper. The civilian evacuation bays were in chaos. Thousands of people tried to board ships designed for hundreds. Families were being separated, children screaming for parents, the elderly being pushed aside in the mad rush for survival. Station security tried to maintain order, but there were too many people and too few ships. Kira felt the crushing weight of déjà vu. This was Colony 447 all over again, except on a massive scale. Thousands would die here because humanity had been too arrogant to believe the Zakrin could reach this far. Sato, a voice cut through the chaos. Jamal's mother, the security officer, appeared through the crowd. Blood ran down her face from a cut above her eye. "Civilian Transport 4 is almost full. I saved you 2 spots, but you need to board now." They pushed through the mob, Sato clearing a path with her authority, and Kira following in her wake. Transport 4 was a heavy cargo hauler converted for passengers, benches welded to the walls and safety webbing strung across every available space. It was already overloaded. People packed in like cargo themselves. Jamal was there, holding 2 spots near the emergency airlock. His eyes widened when he saw Kira. "You're alive." "I saw the military section take a hit and thought..." "No time," Sato interrupted, strapping Kira into the webbing. "Get her off station." "I need to coordinate the defense." "You're not coming?" Kira asked. "I'm military. High place is here." Sato gripped Kira's shoulder hard. "Whatever happens, you keep that data safe. Get it to Admiral Krauss at Firebase Gamma. He's one of the good ones. He'll know what to do with it." But the transport shuddered as its engines fired up. Through the bay doors, Kira could see other transports launching, some successfully escaping, others getting cut down by Zakrin fighters before they could clear the station's protective envelope. It was a massacre. "Tell them," Sato said urgently, her face close to Kira's. "Tell them that your father was right about everything. Tell them we need to stop fighting each other and start fighting the Zakrin properly, or humanity won't survive this war." She stepped back as the transport's airlock began to seal. "Tell them we need to be better than we've been." The door closed, cutting off Sato's face in the chaos of the hangar bay. The transport lifted with a lurch that made several passengers cry out. Through the small windows, Kira watched Nova Station fall away, its hull breached in dozens of places, fires burning in the vacuum, defense platforms reduced to floating wreckage. The pilot pushed the engines hard, accelerating away from the battle. But they weren't safe yet. A Zakrin fighter noticed them, breaking from its attack run on a military frigate to intercept. Its weapons charged that distinctive green glow that haunted Kira's nightmares. "Incoming!" someone screamed. The transport wasn't armed. Wasn't armored. It was just a cargo hauler with too many terrified people inside. The Zakrin fighter's weapons reached maximum charge and Kira closed her eyes, waiting for the impact that would end her second attempt at survival. But instead of the expected explosion, there was a different flash of light. A human destroyer, badly damaged but still fighting, had positioned itself between the transport and the fighter. The warship took the hit meant for the civilian vessel, its shields flaring and failing. But in those precious seconds, the transport accelerated past, putting distance between itself and the battle. The destroyer died, buying them time. Kira watched through the window as the proud warship broke apart, its hull split by secondary explosions. How many crew members had died to save this one transport? How many families would never see their loved ones again? We made it, Jamal said beside her, his voice shaking. We actually made it out, but had they? Kira looked back at Nova Station, now just a bright spot against the darkness of space. The station was still there, still fighting, but its defeat was inevitable. The Zakrin had brought enough force to crack humanity's strongest fortress. When Nova Station fell, the psychological impact would be devastating. People would lose faith. They'd realize that nowhere was truly safe. Around her, the other survivors began to react. Some cried with relief. Others stared blankly in shock. A few vomited from the stress and motion sickness. Jamal's mother moved through the transport, checking for injuries, offering what comfort she could. "Where are we going?" someone asked the pilot. "Firebase Gamma," came the reply. "It's the nearest military installation. 3 days' journey at maximum burn. 3 days in an overcrowded transport with minimal supplies and no certainty that Firebase Gamma would still be standing when they arrived. 3 days to process what had happened, to count the dead, to realize how badly humanity was losing this war. The 3-day journey to Firebase Gamma felt like 3 years. The overcrowded transport struggled with life support systems never designed for this many passengers. The air grew stale and hot. Food ran short. People got sick, and there was no medical bay, only a few emergency supplies that ran out on day 2. Kira spent most of the journey helping Jamal's mother, Officer Chen, maintain order. Chen had taken charge without officially declaring herself in command, and people naturally followed her calm authority. She organized water rations, set up sleeping shifts so the benches could be shared, and kept arguments from escalating into violence. "You're good at this," Chen told Kira during one of their brief rest periods, keeping calm under pressure. "Not many kids your age could handle what you've been through." "I don't feel calm," Kira admitted. "I feel like I'm screaming inside all the time." "That's normal. The trick is not letting the screaming control you." Chen checked her datapad, reviewing the passenger roster. "My son tells me you're carrying something important, something worth risking lives for." Commander Sato thought so. Sato was a good judge of strategic value. Ruthless sometimes, but good. Chen lowered her voice. "When we reach Firebase Gamma, things are going to get complicated. The military will want to debrief you, possibly detain you. They might not be as willing to negotiate as Sato was. So what do I do? You remember that you have leverage. That dead man switch my son helped you set up? Make sure the right people know about it. Not as a threat, but as insurance." Chen's dark eyes were serious. "And you find allies fast. Someone with rank who believes in doing the right thing, not just following orders." The conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the front of the transport. A man had collapsed, unconscious from dehydration and stress. Chen moved quickly to help, leaving Kira to think about what she'd said. Finding allies, doing the right thing. It all sounded good in theory, but Kira had learned that powerful people often had their own definitions of right and wrong. Jamal appeared beside her, carrying 2 small water rations. He handed one to Kira. "Drink. You've been helping everyone else and forgetting yourself." "Thanks." The water was warm and tasted faintly of recycling chemicals, but Kira drank it gratefully. "Your mom's amazing. I don't know how she stays so calm. Practice, I guess. She's dealt with emergencies before, just never one this big." Jamal glanced around to make sure no one was listening. "I've been thinking about what happens when we reach the firebase. My mom's right about them wanting to control you, but there might be a way to use that. How? You've got information they desperately need. The Zakrin just destroyed Nova Station, which means they're closer to Earth than anyone thought possible. Colonial Command is probably panicking right now. That makes them vulnerable. Desperate people make mistakes, but they also make deals they wouldn't normally make." Kira considered this. "You think I should trade the information for something? Not trade. Negotiate terms for cooperation. Big difference." Jamal pulled up a screen on his datapad showing a schematic he'd been working on. "I've been monitoring the transport's communication system. We're picking up encrypted military chatter. From what I can decode, Firebase Gamma is preparing for a major strategic meeting. High-ranking officers from multiple sectors, including Admiral Krauss, who Sato mentioned. That's good, right? It means the right people will be there. Maybe. Or it means the wrong people will be there too. If your father was right about a leak in Colonial Command, then someone at that meeting might be working against humanity's interests." Jamal's voice dropped even lower. We need to figure out who we can trust before we hand over anything. Over the next day, Kira and Jamal worked together to analyze what they knew. Kira shared everything her father had told her. Every odd conversation she'd overheard. Every strange detail from the data they'd managed to decrypt. Jamal cross-referenced it with news reports, military communications, and the patterns of colony attacks. A picture began to emerge, and it was worse than either of them had imagined. The Zakran attacks weren't random. They followed a pattern, hitting colonies that had recently increased their defensive capabilities or changed their communication protocols. It was as if someone was telling the Zakran exactly which targets had upgraded their defenses and were therefore more valuable to hit before they became too strong. Look at this, Jamal said, showing her a timeline. Colony 447 requested new defensive platforms 3 months before the attack. Request denied due to budget constraints. 2 weeks later, Zakran assault. Colony 229 upgraded their sensor arrays and requested additional military presence. Denied. 1 month later, they're gone. The pattern repeats at least 7 times in the past year. Someone in Colonial Command is blocking defensive improvements and then tipping off the Zakran about which colonies to hit, Kira said, feeling sick. That's not just negligence. That's treason. Mass murder, Jamal corrected. Tens of thousands dead because someone's playing politics or worse. But why? What could anyone gain from helping the Zakran? Before Jamal could answer, the transport's alarms blared. The pilot's voice came over the speaker, tense but controlled. All passengers secure yourselves. We're detecting unknown ships on intercept course. Could be Zakran scouts. Panic rippled through the crowded transport. People grabbed for handholds and safety webbing. Children started crying. Chen moved through the cabin, her presence calming people even as her hand rested on the plasma pistol at her hip. Through the window, Kira saw them. 3 small craft, angular and predatory. Zakran design, no question. But they weren't attacking. Just matching velocity and trajectory, pacing the transport like sharks circling prey. Why aren't they firing? Someone asked. Because they want something, Chen said grimly. They're hurting us, the pilot confirmed it. They're forcing us off course. If we don't comply, they'll shoot. But if we do comply, they're steering us away from Firebase Gamma toward an unknown coordinate. We have to fight, a man shouted. We can't just let them take us. With what? Chen shot back. We're a cargo hauler with no weapons and barely functional shields. We fight, we die. Simple as that. The debate raged through the transport, but ultimately the pilot made the call. They'd follow the Zakran escort, but slowly, buying time to send out a distress signal and hope someone could respond before they reached whatever destination the enemy had planned. Hours crept by in tense silence. The Zakran fighters maintained their formation, adjusting course occasionally to keep the transport on its new heading. Long-range sensors showed they were heading toward an asteroid field, a place where larger ships couldn't easily follow, where a transport could be boarded or destroyed with no witnesses. They're going to kill us, someone whispered, and the fear spread like infection through the cabin. But Kira noticed something odd. The Zakran fighters' behavior wasn't quite right. They were hurting, yes, but their formation was defensive, not aggressive, as if they were protecting the transport rather than capturing it. And when a piece of space debris drifted too close, one of the fighters actually destroyed it with a precision shot that cleared the transport's path. I don't think they're going to kill us, Kira said quietly to Jamal. I think they're escorting us somewhere. But why would the Zakran escort a human transport? The answer came when they reached the coordinates. Hidden in the asteroid field was a ship. Not Zakran, human. A military frigate with its transponder dark, running silent. As the transport approached, the frigate powered up its communication systems and sent a text-only message to avoid voice identification. Transport vessel, this is a friend. The Zakran escorts are borrowed. You are safe. Prepare to dock. This is insane, Chen muttered, reading the message. Since when do humans borrow Zakran fighters? The pilot had no choice but to comply. The Zakran escorts fell back as the transport maneuvered toward the frigate's docking bay. Everyone aboard was on edge, expecting a trap, but the docking procedure went smoothly. As the airlock cycled and the bay pressurized, armed Marines appeared, but they didn't raise weapons. Instead, they formed an honor guard. A woman in admiral's insignia stepped forward. She was older, maybe 60, with silver hair and eyes that had seen too much. "My name is Admiral Helena Kraus. You're safe now. All of you." The transport's passengers filed out slowly, suspicious and confused. But the Marines began distributing water, food, and medical supplies. Real help, not a trap. Gradually, people began to relax. Kraus approached Officer Chen first, recognizing authority when she saw it. They spoke briefly, and Chen pointed to Kira. The Admiral's sharp eyes focused on the young girl, and she walked over with purpose. "Kira Reeves, Commander Sato told me about you before Nova Station fell." Kraus's voice was rough but not unkind. "She said you're carrying something vital. Something worth dying for." "She did die for it," Kira said quietly. "Lots of people did. I know. And their sacrifice dawning. Someone in our own comm." The hidden frigate, designation Shadow Phoenix, became Kira's home for the next 3 weeks. Admiral Kraus had converted the ship into a mobile command center for what she called Operation Cleanhouse. The data stick's contents proved even more damaging than anyone had imagined. Names, communication logs, financial transfers, all the evidence needed to expose a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of colonial command. But exposing corruption in wartime was dangerous. The conspirators had resources, connections, and desperate motivation to keep their crimes hidden. Kraus couldn't simply broadcast the evidence and hope for the best. She needed to build a coalition, gather enough loyal officers to act simultaneously, and ensure the truth reached people who would actually do something about it. Kira found herself in an odd position. She was technically a refugee under protective custody, but Kraus treated her more like a junior officer. The Admiral sought her input, asked her questions, and actually listened to her answers. Other crew members initially viewed her with curiosity and pity, but as days passed, they began to respect the girl who'd survived 2 evacuations and outsmarted colonial intelligence long enough to get the evidence to the right person. Jamal thrived in the ship's engineering section, his skills with computer systems making him valuable despite his age. Officer Chen, his mother, joined Kraus's security detail and helped coordinate communication with other ships in the growing coalition. The transport survivors were gradually redistributed to safer locations, but Kira, Jamal, and Chen stayed aboard Shadow Phoenix, now permanent members of the operation. "We've confirmed 12 high-ranking officers willing to support action against the conspirators," Kraus told her senior staff during one of the daily briefings Kira was now allowed to attend. "But we need more. If we move too soon with too little support, they'll bury us and the evidence along with it." "What about going public?" suggested Commander Park, the frigate's executive officer. "Release everything to civilian news networks, let public pressure force accountability." "The conspirators control most major news outlets through corporate connections," Kraus replied. "They'd spin it as enemy propaganda or the ravings of a conspiracy theorist. We need institutional support first, then public disclosure." Kira raised her hand tentatively. Everyone turned to look at her, and she felt her face heat up. She still wasn't used to being taken seriously by adults, especially military officers. "What if we don't release everything at once? What if we leak just enough to make people start asking questions, then follow up with more evidence as the pressure builds?" Kraus considered this, her sharp eyes evaluating. "Gradual disclosure. Build a narrative that's harder to dismiss. Interesting approach. It would take longer, but it might be more effective." She nodded slowly. "Good thinking, Reeves." The plan took shape over the following days. Jamal and a team of communication specialists prepared data packages, each one containing enough evidence to raise serious questions without revealing the full scope of what they knew. The first package would focus on the pattern of denied defensive requests followed by Zakrin attacks. Hard to dismiss as coincidence, but not quite proof of treason. Meanwhile, Kraus's coalition grew. More officers joined after seeing the evidence, horrified by the betrayal. But they also faced setbacks. 2 potential allies died in what were officially called training accidents. A third disappeared entirely, his ship found drifting empty in deep space. The conspirators knew something was happening and were taking action to protect themselves. "They're getting desperate," Chen observed during a security meeting. "That makes them more dangerous, but also more likely to make mistakes." The first data package, released to carefully selected journalists and junior officers, created exactly the reaction Kraus had hoped for. Questions began circulating through military networks. Why were so many defensive requests denied? Why did attacks always seem to follow soon after? The conspirators tried to contain the speculation, but information in the digital age was like water finding cracks in a dam. Package 2, released a week later, containing encrypted communications that showed Colonial Command had been warned about specific attacks, days in advance, but failed to respond. This caused more serious waves. Several junior officers started their own investigations. 3 colony governors demanded answers from their military liaisons. "We're building momentum," Krauss said during the briefing. "But we need something bigger. Something that will break through the official denials and force real accountability." Kira had been thinking about this. "The Zakrin defectors," she said. "If we could arrange for them to testify, to explain how they received their intelligence about human colonies, that would be proof from the enemy themselves." "That's incredibly risky," Park objected. "Bringing Zakrin to a human installation? We'd have riots. People would never accept their testimony." "Then we don't bring them to a human installation," Kira replied. "We broadcast it. Show people that not all Zakrin want this war. That there are individuals on their side who are as horrified by the conspiracy as we are. Make it about truth versus lies, not humans versus aliens." Krauss smiled, the first genuine smile Kira had seen from her. "You think like your father. He was always finding angles no one else saw." She turned to her communication officer. "Set it up. Find a neutral location where we can record testimony from the Zakrin defectors, something that can't be dismissed as fabricated." The recording session took place on an abandoned mining station, neutral territory between human and Zakrin space. 3 Zakrin agreed to testify on record, their chittering language translated by computer into human speech. They explained how hardline elements in their own empire had been communicating with corrupt human officials, coordinating attacks for mutual benefit. The humans profited from the war economy, while the Zakrin hardliners gained political power by presenting humans as an existential threat. The Zakrin defectors were risking their lives by speaking out. If the hardliners discovered their identities, their families would be executed. But they did it anyway because they believed that peace was possible, that their species could coexist with humanity, if the warmongers on both sides could be removed from power. When the testimony broadcast across human networks 3 days later, the response was explosive. Some people dismissed it as propaganda. Others called for immediate execution of the defectors. But many, especially those who'd lost loved ones to the war, started demanding answers. Why were corrupt officials working with the enemy? Why had so many colonies been left defenseless? Why was Colonial Command more interested in covering up the truth than protecting citizens? The conspirators tried to suppress the story, but it had already spread too far. Independent journalists picked it up. Colony representatives demanded investigations. Junior officers started refusing orders from commanders they suspected of involvement. The careful structure of corruption began to crack. Then came the response Kira had feared. A strike team hit Shadow Phoenix while the ship was resupplying at a remote depot. They came fast and hard, professional soldiers following orders to eliminate the source of the leaks. The ship's alarms wailed as boarding pods attached to the hull. "All hands to defensive positions," Krauss ordered over the ship's communication system. "This is not a drill. We have hostile boarders." Kira found herself hustled to the ship's secure vault along with other non-combat personnel. Jamal was there too, looking terrified but trying to hide it. They could hear weapons fire echoing through the corridors, the distinctive crack of plasma rifles and the deeper boom of breaching charges. "They're going to kill us," someone whispered. "They're going to kill everyone who knows the truth." But the conspirators had made a critical mistake. They'd assumed Shadow Phoenix was just one ship with one crew. They hadn't realized that Krauss's coalition had grown to include dozens of vessels, many of them positioned nearby specifically to respond to this kind of attack. 3 friendly ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel right on top of the depot. The strike team's transport tried to flee but was disabled before it could escape. The boarders on Shadow Phoenix suddenly found themselves trapped, outnumbered, and facing Marines who were extremely angry about traitors attacking their own. The firefight was brief, but brutal. When it ended, 12 strike team members were dead and 8 captured. The prisoners, under interrogation, provided the final piece of evidence Krauss needed: direct orders from a Colonial Command general to eliminate all witnesses to the conspiracy. "That's it," Krauss said, staring at the recorded confession on her datapad. "This is enough. We move now." The coordinated action happened simultaneously across a dozen military installations. Loyal officers arrested their compromised superiors. Evidence packages flooded public networks faster than they could be suppressed. The Zakrin defector's testimony played on every news channel, and at the heart of it all was the data from Kira's father, the evidence he'd died to protect. The conspirators tried to fight back, but the truth was undeniable. Too many people had seen the evidence. Too many officers had joined Krause's coalition. Within 48 hours, 17 high-ranking officials were under arrest.